and welcome back to On the Same Wavelength, the wireless perspective with Peri. And today I'm joined by Dan. Thanks, Dan, for coming.
Sure.
And we're going to talk about ESTeem's flexible mounting options, from pole mounting our radios to enclosure mounting, and when you would pick them. So I'm going to pick your brain on that. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so let's start with why. Why does how you install our ESTeem radios even matter?
Yeah, so when we look at installations and how these are put into service, there is no blueprint, there's no design build of how you want to install a radio. And so when we start looking at this, as everything is now evolving in the wireless world, and most of the applications are utilizing higher frequencies, 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, 5.8 gigahertz. And really, in addition to this evolution in terms of frequency, we're realizing that how those radios are being installed actually has a big impact on not only speed, but also on range.
Okay, so I guess what's the difference between direct pole mounting your radios and enclosure mounting them?
Yeah, good question. When we start talking about enclosure mounting or cabinet mounting, this is kind of the quote unquote traditional way that radios have always been installed. And what that means is that that's located in essentially a cabinet or an enclosure.
Okay.
We have a coax cable that goes to a lightning arrestor that acts as a bulkhead mount. Then we have a coax cable that goes up to the antenna that's remotely mounted.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of how it's been done forever. And so when we started looking at pole mounting, really what that does is we actually take the radio itself and mount this directly up onto the pole remotely. And the reason why we do this really is the biggest reason when we're designing these radios is to eliminate those feed lines.
Okay.
And so the feed lines are a big expense, as well as the larger problem with the feed lines is it's a source of attenuation or loss of power. At those high frequencies, it has a much greater impact.
Okay.
So for example, at 2.4 gigahertz, just a simple 50-foot cable has basically, we're losing half the power between the radio and the antenna because of that attenuation.
Yeah.
And so we designed this, and so when it's mounted directly out on the pole, it's actually a NEMA 4 box made to withstand the weather and just basically live out there.
Okay, so why and when would you choose to pole mount?
Yeah, so really when we start looking at why do we want to choose a pole mount, there's a couple of reasons. One, like I discussed a little bit, is we get a lot better performance.
Yes.
And typically we get better range of that.
Okay.
Right? Because we're cutting out the losses.
Yeah.
The other one is for the simplicity and the ease of installation.
Yeah.
Right. One of the harder parts of hanging cable is dealing with the weight. Then you start looking at doing things like a bend radius. Now, in order to be able to pole mount this, we just basically are utilizing PoE or power over Ethernet. So it's just a single simple Ethernet cable that runs up to it, which is very lightweight. It's also very easy to route up there.
Okay. Are there any limitations to pole mounting our radios?
Yeah, there's a couple limitations to it. One is going to be that, it is the fact that it's remotely mounted, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be up on top of that tower. And so that's a concern for some people. Most time it really, once you start looking at it, because it's PoE and we're dropping that cable down, as we can still access the radio.
Okay.
We're just doing it down at the bottom rather than directly tying into it.
Okay.
The other one is that it's going to be mounted away from the balance of system, accessories, PLCs, other equipment that it may be dealing with.
Okay.
Those are really kind of the two limitations to it is all.
Okay. So I guess when would I choose to enclosure mount versus pole mounting it?
Yeah, so enclosure mounting is still very valuable. And so there's really kind of a few different use cases. Number one, especially when you're looking at those low license frequencies, say 150 megahertz or 450 megahertz, there's much less attenuation in that cable at those frequencies.
Okay.
And so the advantage is that we can mount the radio directly in that enclosure with the other equipment. And usually this is more when it's a security concern.
Okay.
Or if needs to be environmentally controlled, say whether it's heat or cooling within that, or if it's going into something like a class 1 Div 2 rated environment that we need to basically be able to mount into that enclosure to do that.
Okay. Is there a cost difference between the two?
Typically they're just about the same thing if we kind of start looking at it, a direct comparison.
Yeah.
But one of the big advantages, kind of like I mentioned, is that a lot of times when we start doing a pole mount, we can use these little direct mount antennas that I showed you as opposed to something like this.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a big cost savings there. So it can really vary anywhere from being essentially the same cost
Okay,
for the hardware to significantly less because we can eliminate the coax feed line as well as that antenna.
okay,
And then also the savings on the installation side of it.
okay. How reliable are both installation types?
Actually, very reliable, right? It all comes down to, doing it correctly and having everything, grounded correctly with it. But both options are incredibly reliable.
Okay, so I guess what are some key questions to ask before deciding whether you should pole mount a radio or enclosure mount it? How do people decide?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing that when we start looking at the different options is to consider, is this a new installation or is this a modernization of an old hardware?
Okay,
Because a lot of times people will choose to stay enclosure mount if they want to try and repurpose and use antennas and feed lines and lightning arresters that may be already installed. And the other consideration is from a performance standpoint or a range standpoint, how does that impact it? If we're moving from a low frequency to a higher frequency, all of a sudden we may not have enough power to make those links. So we actually have a tool an RF design tool to where you can actually compare the two, put the information in, see what kind of difference in speed you're going to get,
okay,
see what kind of difference in range you're going to get, as well as what the application demands are.
okay. So also the other thing, I guess, say somebody already has an enclosure mount and they put a radio in the enclosure mount and then later on down the road, they want to switch to a pole mount.
Mhm.
Are those methods easy to do, like transfer?
Yeah, it's actually a real simple swap over. It's the same exact radio that we use. So what it would take would be just the pole mount kit, which
Okay.
was inexpensive.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we'll have to change antennas or use a different jumper cable because the connectors may be different, but it's actually real simple to do either way. It's all the same radio, it just depends on how we're going to put it in.
Well, that sounds pretty easy, pretty
Very
simple.
yeah.
And I personally like the pole mount the best. What do you like?
It's a much simpler install and typically that's kind of the go-to.
Yeah,
But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with the traditional enclosure mounts. It just adds a little bit more work
yeah,
and can add a little bit more cost, but ultimately it comes down to what the customers are looking for.
exactly. Well, thanks for joining us, Dan.
My pleasure.
And I guess what's the best way if anyone else has any questions to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can either, get a hold of us, right off of the website. We've got a chat tool that's on there. You can email, you can call, really it just about any method that there is anymore that you can get a hold of us. And we'll also have kind of a guideline of this up on the website
Oh, perfect.
that it kind of compares the two. Cause like I say, it's not that one is good, one is bad. It's just, there's a difference between them.
For sure. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys next month.
Thanks.